Kia ora, talofa, namaste, haere mai, and welcome to this week's episode of The Niche Cast. We are from The Niche Cache, theniche-cache.com, where you can read lots of Aotearoa sporting stuff. Probably not complaints about stuff or moaning or clickbait or just headlines or even premium content. You won't find any of that, but you will find Aotearoa sporting insights and analysis, the fresh yarns we got on the website right now, Kiwi NRL spotlight on Adam Pompey, got a Warriors versus Titans preview, got an NRLW round 3 preview, also got the deep dive into the Warriors youngsters and what's happening in their system and their reserve grade system. Shout out to the subscriber podcast as well, because on that podcast, which is available for the Patreon and paid Substack subscribers, I did suggest that the Warriors development system and pipeline might be one of the best in the NRL right now. We kind of whittled it down, not quite as good as the Panthers or the Storm or the Broncos, but definitely top 5, I reckon, which is pretty impressive coming out of the pandemic. So you can read all about that on our website. Also got the latest flying Kiwis, got a deep dive into the Wellington Phoenix Academy system as well. Lots of Kiwi sports content, some old yarns. You can still read about the White Ferns and their campaign in Sri Lanka. You can read about, obviously, the football Ferns at the World Cup. All of that stuff is available on our website, theniche-cache.com. And if you do enjoy the Niche Cache and you do enjoy our content, whether it is the yarns on the website or the podcast or even the email newsletter, if you enjoy that and you want to support it directly, you basically want to fund it, that's all good. You can sign up to our Patreon or the paid Substack subscription, whatever method you choose. The links are all in the description box, and we do an extra podcast every week that goes out to the Patreon whānau and the paid Substack subscribers. That is delivered through Patreon and the paid Substack feed as well. So not only are you supporting the Niche Cache and all of our content, there's also that extra podcast every week that comes out on the Tuesday, along with the variety show that you can get on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. Subscribe to our YouTube. That would be great. Also, shout out to the email newsletter that comes out every Monday and Friday evening, full of Aotearoa sporting notes and nuggets. Like lots and lots of notes and nuggets. We go hard and we just share all the Aotearoa sporting information that we can find on our regular Niche Cache beat, as well as basically all the Niche Cache is part of that email newsletter. You get the links to the website, you get all the links to the podcast, any information you require about the Niche Cache, and lots of Aotearoa sporting bits and bobs that are written just for the email newsletter. That's basically what the Niche Cache does. Big yarns on the website, podcast, subscriber podcast for those who support the Niche Cache, and an email newsletter twice a week. Nothing better. That's all you need for your Aotearoa sporting needs, unless you want to read about the Netball World Cup. We can't help you there. Probably not going to tell you about the All Blacks either. But we might on this podcast, because we are going to do some World Cup chat. So stay tuned for that if you want to hear how the Blackcaps and the All Blacks can win their World Cup. But first, we need some mindfulness. The Chief. Not the Wellington Phoenix coach, but anecdotally, you can be known as the Chief right now. The Northland Buddha, maybe?
Yeah, I'll take that. That's fine. And we're working today off a quote from Herbert Reed. Simplicity is not a goal, but one arrives at simplicity in spite of oneself as one approaches the real meaning of things.
Crikey Jack. We have full hundies on that one. Simplicity isn't a goal, it's something that you arrive on your route to.
You arrive at, simplicity is not a goal, but one arrives at simplicity in spite of oneself as one approaches the real meaning of things. So it's just sort of like you can't be simple and a deliberate sense.
Yeah, like
Because if you think about it, that's actually complicating things to try strip stuff back and try deliberately be as simple as possible. You often end up making more chaos for yourself, as opposed to if you move in a different path, simplicity will come naturally because you're actually like getting to the core of something. I
and it's
think
like
that's what he's trying to say.
the path is basically your path to your like soul's purpose, to your passion,
Yeah,
to your peace, and that delivers the simplicity. Like if you're just trying to move towards peace, things are going to get more simple for you
but
because
you can't
peace.
make them simple
Yeah,
and expect them to become peaceful because the opposite will happen.
yeah. Imagine being like, yeah, I'm trying to simplify my life, and then someone else is like, how are you going to do that? And you're like, oh, I'm going to do this, and I've got this and that, and everything else, and I'm going to cut out this, and I'm going to do this, and I'm
Yeah.
going to do this, and then I'm going to meditate for 10 minutes, and then everything else is going to happen.
Yeah,
Well, you,
I've written out my exact daily calendar to the 10th minute every single time of how I'm going to act. That's how simple my life is going to be until the first time that you miss a deadline, right?
well, just how about we work towards peace, and then you'll find simplicity
And then
on the
simplicity will take care of
way.
itself.
Bit of World Cup chat to start us off here because it's working through some notes and trying to process this. Like we are in an amazing time, and as you said, you might have said it on the subscriber podcast. Maybe it was in the variety show. So much Aotearoa sporting yarn that it does get muddled in my noggin. There's a Olympics next year.
Yeah.
And if you're whinging and moaning about the football ferns, or if you're excited about the football ferns, don't worry, they're back next year at another major tournament, and that's next year. We've still got the rest of this year where we have Tall Blacks. They're about to start their World Cup campaign. The All Blacks are in their World Cup, and shout out to them. I only really care about the All Blacks when Richie Mo'unga is starting number 10. I just think he's the best player in the world, and the All Blacks usually win when he is starting number 10, and that's when I find the All Blacks are the most exciting. So as long as he's starting number 10 heading into this World Cup and for the World Cup, I certainly think the All Blacks can win this World Cup. And while we do poke and prod at the amount of All Blacks coverage in Aotearoa, that I find that interesting because in this World Cup bubble, I also believe the Blackcaps can win their World Cup. And this is on the back of recent news reported around the world. Kane Williamson has a net session. And if Kane Williamson's having a net session in early August, it might have been late July, who knows. But if old mate Kano's having a net session, probably at Bay Oval, wielding his grey nickels bat, he could be back for the World Cup. Like that seems kind of likely. I don't know if he's going to be bursting around the field, but if old mate if he can bat and if he can move between the wickets, he might be in that World Cup team. And I think Kane Williamson's in that World Cup team. I have worked myself, not quite on the comeback trail from an ACL injury, but maybe it is because, heartbreak from the last World Cup. We're healing from a broken heart, and I think the Blackcaps can win this World Cup in India. I've got a variety of reasons, all sorts of notes. Maybe it's Trent Boult just dominating every T20 competition he plays in. Maybe it's Matt Henry dominating everything he plays in. Maybe it's the team's general experience in India. I don't know. Maybe it's because Devon Conway's the best batter in the world. Daryl Mitchell's quite good. Whatever. Glenn Phillips, the funkiest cricketer in the world. I don't know. Maybe it's just the fact that Aotearoa is the best sporting nation in the world. But I certainly think that the Blackcaps can win this World Cup in the same vein that the All Blacks can win their World Cup, juxtaposed against the football ferns. They were never really going to win this World Cup. And that's fine. But it's just we're slicing and dicing these World Cups because we also have the Tall Blacks at their World Cup. And I think it's unrealistic to suggest they can win their World Cup. And they might win a few games, but the Tall Blacks and the football ferns sit in one zone of World Cup context and how we assess their performances and where they're at, whereas the Blackcaps and the All Blacks are in a different tier of like World Cup context. It's not to poo-poo one or the other or say like we should all jump on board the Blackcaps wagon, whatever. It's just to lay out the context and how these teams fit into their respective World Cups.
Yeah, because I think one of the aspects of that Football Ferns World Cup is a lot of people I felt, including probably the team themselves, like they said this too. They said they had two stated aims. One was to win their first game, and then the other was to get out of the group play, which, like, they did the first one. They didn't quite do the second one. They missed out basically by goal difference. You know, they had 4 points with an even goal difference. And this is an expanded World Cup. So it used to be 24 teams the last two times. Before that, I think it was 16. But was it? I can't remember what the 2011 one was. That might have still been 16, but definitely 2015 and 2019 were 2014 World Cups, which meant that four of the top six third place finishes also went through to the next round. And guess what? Football Ferns with 4 points and an even goal difference would have been one of the two top third place finishes in either of the last two World Cups. So what they did here at this World Cup, and admittedly, like they wouldn't have been drawn against a team like Philippines because Philippines wouldn't have qualified in a 24 team World Cup, although that actually would have been better for the Ferns because that's the team they lost to. But just strictly 4 points from group play would have got them through to the knockouts of the last two World Cups. It didn't this time because it's a deeper thing and you only the top two go through. But that's that's an element of context to show just how close they were to achieving that. But even still, like I was trying to pump brakes on that throughout the lead in saying like, yeah, we're aiming for that, but don't expect that because that's like twice as much as you need. Well, I was going to say you need two positive results. You need two wins to make it through to the knockouts, or you need three positive results, as we saw. They needed to also get at least a draw against Philippines, or a win, and then it didn't matter against Switzerland. That didn't happen, but that's like twice as much as what their first goal was. So those are not equivalent things. It's like the first goal, achieving that is one thing, and then you basically have to achieve the entire thing again in order to hit the second goal. So I think expectation was an important factor, and just I don't know the difference between the people who are looking at the Football Ferns now and saying, yeah, proud of what they achieved, they gave it a good shot and punched above their weight and whatever, and didn't make the knockouts, but it was close, and they put themselves in a position, and it was unfortunate they slipped up against Philippines, but also they had chances to draw or even win that game, blah blah blah, versus people who are using words like failure and stuff now, which I've just seen a little bit too often. It's like it's not a failure. They just didn't achieve the best case scenario. Like that doesn't mean you failed, but expectation going into that World Cup is important. So that's the context of what you're saying there. It's like the same thing about the Tall Blacks. We go in there, no one's going to, but if you go in there expecting them to beat USA or they should beat Jordan, I think, and they will have a chance against Greece as long as Giannis doesn't play, who I double checked on this, and he is still on their long list. Like he's still officially in contention, but it doesn't sound like anyone expects him to be fit because he's only within a month had like knee cleanup surgery, but he is hanging around trying to be ready. So that's a little bit of a factor, but he's not expected to be fit, which probably gives the Tall Blacks a little bit of a chance there. We'll see. Like, can they get in the top two and make the knockouts? I don't know, but that's a similar thing to what you're saying about the Football Ferns. But that's the context of the Tall Blacks World Cup thing, and therefore we know whether to be. You keep the expectations in mind. You know whether to be excited about certain things or what their realistic chances are. Context of the All Blacks going into a Rugby World Cup is always that they're trying to win it. The context of Blackcaps World Cup with a potentially fit Kane Williamson, I'm still hesitant to lean into that idea emotionally. But I think even if Kane Williamson doesn't play, I still think the Blackcaps can win the World Cup. Obviously, it's a better opportunity if Williamson is fit and available, but still think that's a very good Blackcaps team that I would expect them to make the semi-finals even without Williamson if they can play somewhere near the capacity we know they're capable of. So it's just like all these World Cups are exciting if you keep the realistic expectations and context around, right? As long as you know what the team where they are at, then you know whether they're overachieving or underachieving or whatever, and just keeping that realistic. is kind of the key to enjoying the World Cup stuff. I mean, it's the same with the Olympics as well, isn't it? It's like we know New Zealand aren't going to be competing with USA or whoever for overall medals, which means that when someone scrapes through with a bronze, if that happens to an American, no one cares. Like the Americans are just counting their goals. Happens to a New Zealander, that's an amazing achievement. Then we all get to be excited about that. That's cool. It's just that the context of these different tournaments is important.
The Tall Blacks World Cup campaign doesn't start till later this month. First
Mm.
game is 26th, it might be the 27th New Zealand time, against USA. So it goes New Zealand, USA, Jordan, and Greece. So you'd imagine they might be able to split those games 1-1 and then have a game against Greece to try and qualify late in the tournament. We know the Blackcaps World Cup doesn't start for a while. To be honest, they could just hit pause and allow Kane Williamson to be ready. That would be great. And who knows when the Rugby World Cup is. But I do want to catch your vibe here on the Football World Cup. Now that the group stages are over, I just want to hear how you're feeling about the big dogs of the World Cup, the best teams. Because I have felt like women's football is growing so quickly that there's just so many other teams that are good. And it's kind of like I have this, I don't know what to do with it just yet, because I do want to wait and see if like the USA, they might just come out and dominate the knockout stages and tear everyone apart, win their third World Cup in a row, is it?
Yeah, I think it would be.
Which would
It might
be
be fourth out
pretty,
of five as well, something like
yeah, that
that.
would be pretty crazy. They've got the pedigree, they've got the caliber, all good. But I do also have this theory that women's football is just growing so quickly and powerfully that the USA's success coincided with women's football not being that strong around the world. So now that the international game, and there's so many good nations, and there are other nations like New Zealand on the rise, because the Kiwi perspective is really interesting, because as New Zealand grows, that reflects the state of that sport around the world. The football Ferns were good in this World Cup. They're only getting better. That is the state of women's football around the world. All these other nations like New Zealand are getting so much better. And I'm curious how that looks against the USA dynasty. That's just the vibe I'm getting. I'm also aware of just hating too much on the USA team. So I am kind of hitting pause on that one. But I am curious how you're viewing some of these big dog nations in women's football as we enter the Women's World Cup knockout stages.
Yeah, that's something I've spent quite a bit of time thinking about actually recently, because I've been coming up with these theories. Like I watched the USA Portugal game on the edge of my seat, genuinely thinking, particularly when Portugal had that one chance near the end. It's like they hit the post. It's like if that goes in, America's out of the World Cup in the group stage. Like that was that close to happening. It's just like a shade of paint on the post there was the difference, which frankly was also the difference for the football Ferns too. Like that Jackie Hand hitting the post twice, like that alone, either of those goals had gone in or in two different games. Either of them went in, Ferns would have been through if those results then stood from that point. Like football's cruel like that, but it's a fascinating wake up call, I think, for that USA team, because it wasn't just that they struggled, it was how they struggled. And I'm watching them against Portugal, and they're barely completing a pass in the midfield. Like they're working it up the wings okay, but mostly they're just, especially in the second half when they were rattled as hell. Like they didn't even need to win that. A draw was going to put them through, but they were rattled as hell, thinking that they just were playing that far beneath their own expectations, I suppose, is expectations again, contextualizing things once more. They it was like, they brought on Megan Rapinoe with about 30 minutes to go or something, and I swear she didn't complete a pass all game. It just felt like every time she got the ball, she tried to make the miracle ball over the top, and she wasn't the only one. Like she was maybe the most notable of that. I think she was thrown on with some sort of instruction, surely, but like in general, that was just how America played. There were a couple times when the midfielders were able to press up and win the ball in a challenge and then just carry forward on the dribble where they looked dangerous, but they weren't passing between each other. It was crazy. And I saw the pass maps afterwards. There's a big hole in the middle of where America should have been controlling that game and weren't, because Portugal just chucked in a nice little box midfield and USA didn't know what they were doing. And that sort of coalesce with an idea I was already thinking about, which is like, when you think about how America has won their last few World Cups, they're not necessarily the team that you go looking like this team is just technically superior to everyone else. It's really they're physically superior to everyone else. It's typical American athleticism, it's being bigger, stronger, faster, having that the mentality of being able to win as well is a big factor for them. But I mean, what you're seeing in European football at the moment, in particular, and there was a Emma Hayes, who's the coach of the Chelsea women's team, who's an extremely good coach, has just been winning everything with Chelsea for the last few years. She's been writing like a column during the World Cup for the Telegraph, one of the English papers, and I've excerpted it in a piece I'm writing, which covers on part of this because I thought it was fascinating. Where she said something about how like the professional leagues get the most credit should get the most credit for the way that players are developing these days. It's not necessarily the countries, it's not the governing bodies of national teams, it's the leagues. And I definitely think that's true of Portugal, where you look at how have they got so much better in the last 5 years. It's like, well, Benfica in particular, but also Sporting to a lesser extent, have gotten that much better in the last few years because they've latched onto the men's team success. Money has been filtered through to the women's side, because they're the best teams in Portugal. They're qualifying for Champions League, playing against the best teams every year now, and they're just the level has gone up so quickly. Most of that Portuguese team is from that Benfica team. Like it's the clubs who are developing those players, and that's Portugal has a big footballing heritage, so they've got that for themselves. But that Hayes article also mentioned how I think it was Colombia. She was talking about how good Colombia have been this World Cup. It's like, well, the reason Colombia have got good isn't because Colombian football has boosted their women's stock so much. It's because Spanish football has done it for Colombia, because the best Colombian players are going to play in Spain. And Spain, the Spanish league is extremely good. Barcelona are the best club team in the world. Like that's Colombia's gotten good by latching onto that. And I think you can say the same thing about that Jamaica team last night, knocking out Brazil. Like that Jamaica team, most of their players are from the American system, obvious geographic, connection there, or from the English system because of the diaspora, the Jamaican heritage that kids who have grown up with Jamaican parents or grandparents or whatever in like London or whatever. That's how they've developed players to get to where they are. I think Nigeria's had a bit of that with players playing in England and America as well. I think who was it? Haiti, for example, a lot of French connections, a lot of American connections. Most of these minnows teams, and it's been maybe the story of the tournament, is how some of these minnows nations have, previous minnow nations have turned up and just overperformed. A lot of that is because of other countries in a funny way. Like they've found a way to latch on to bigger, stronger, most importantly, more resourced nations. And this swings back around to New Zealand too, because we've done the same thing. Our avenue is Australian football, which is why I kind of think like, as much as certainly this is not going to be the case at the Cricket World Cup, this is not going to be the case at the Rugby World Cup, but I do think that habits of the lifetime probably got to put aside. It would be worth cheering for the Matildas the rest of the way now that New Zealand are out, because the stronger Australian football is, the stronger New Zealand football is, because our players are going through the same pathway of the A-League, right? Every single one of the Australian team, I found the thing that proved this. I looked it up. Every single player in the Matildas squad has played A-League. Only two of them still play A-League. And one of them is Claire Hunt, who's not going to play A-League for much longer because she's been borderline their best player at the World Cup so far. That's their pathway. You get to the A-League, you move on to a bigger league. I think 14 of our players have played A-League, so there's nearly 2/3 of the squad. I think it's 11 of them are still playing A League. So clearly we're not at that same level, right? We've still got our players in the A League, the bulk of our squad, whereas Australians have gone through the A League to higher leagues. We're not there yet, but that's the same thing. We're latching onto that the same way. Emma Hayes also talked about how coaching, therefore, has become like the access to top level coaching and sophisticated tactics and stuff like this in the women's game. All of this is latching onto men's stuff, right? It's the heritage of men's football filtering through from those big clubs because it's the clubs who are well, basically that's where all the money is, pretty much. America doesn't have that, right? What is the American men's team like? They're not that good, right? And the players that are good are the ones that didn't come up in America. They're the ones that grew up in Germany or England or whatever. What's the MLS like? It's fine. It's fine. It's an okay league. It's not very technically sophisticated. It's not particularly great. Lionel Messi's playing there now, so that's cool. But it's not an amazing league. The American women's team, I think, are finding that out pretty quickly. Like when other countries have caught up with these other things, they've found that they have nowhere else to go. They're just still relying on physicality and good old fashioned American like dominance. And that Portuguese team is not the most talented going around. It's a pretty good team. They would have made the knockouts in most other groups, but they wouldn't have like gone on to win a World Cup. And they completely outfoxed the Americans tactically. That's fascinating to me how that's going to play on down the line. I think all these European clubs in particular, but also these non-European teams, rather, all these non-European teams who have also latched onto the European club system have got so much smarter tactically and technically about how they do this. And America just doesn't have that access. They don't have that footballing heritage, to quote Jose Mourinho, you know? And New Zealand, the way it ties into us is that we have access to the same thing that countries like Nigeria and Jamaica have been, and South Africa maybe even, have been improving themselves with, because we've got that latch on to Australia who have the latch on to England. So that's cool. Like we're on that same pathway. America's not. So that's crazy how that's going to work down the line. I wonder what's going to happen there.
Let alone how that impacts the college system in America, which you have talked about
Oh,
for
absolutely.
a couple of years now.
Yeah, great
That
point.
that college system, like again, context to New Zealand, our best players used to go to college in America, men and women. Now those players can just go to a professional team. So
Yeah.
the strength of college football in America is also decreasing because the best American players, they're going to go to a professional system straight away as well. Why would you go to college when you can get a professional job straight out of school? And I think what a lot of Americans overlooked is how many foreigners went to college in America to play football and to play sport, whereas now that is not the best option. And so the quality of college football is going to decrease. That production line is going to decrease, let alone everything you're saying at the professional system. And I think maybe that sets up a really interesting knockout stage to see where our hypothesis sits in 2023. And then we can kind of check in with that maybe next year with the Olympics and all these little checkpoints along the way. But specifically with the knockout stages, because it has felt like a lot of teams, like as I said on the Variety Show or the Sub Pod, like it's all chaos. It's all chaos at this World Cup. Anyone can beat anyone, and that's how it's been in the group stages. But there is that feeling that the big dogs are still. Well, you mentioned Brazil got knocked out, so they're not there.
They're not quite big dogs in the same way as
Right.
they are in the men's thing, though.
But ultimately the big dogs are still in the knockout stages, and we'll see how they perform when it matters most.
Yeah, and those big dogs also have like the things we're talking about are the ones who have that same like footballing heritagey type thing. Japan, the way the Japanese play, you know that directly. England, Germany, Spain, etc., etc. You know, America again doesn't have that.
The Warriors face the Gold Coast Titans on Friday evening. and that is over on the Gold Coast, which is interesting because the old Titans, they had a win last week against the Cowboys, and they seem to be moving and grooving in the right direction. Although I still believe the Warriors are favorites, and I still believe the Warriors should be too good for the Titans, especially given this. Speaking of hypothesis, I do like this might be a bit of a NRL hypothesis of following the trend and whether that is what we should be doing. Where as far as stats go, because the Titans love a missed tackle, they're fifth for missed tackles. Basically, their leading missed tacklers are the blokes on the edges, which is pretty interesting given a lot of our storyline with the Warriors over the last few weeks, because it's been Rocco Berry shining on the right edge, right? This week, Rocco Berry's right edge, which is Sean Johnson, Maratene Kore, and Dylan Watene-Zelezniak, they will be coming up against the Titans' left edge, which is David Fafita, Kieran Foran, Brian Kelly, Alofiana Khan Pereira. And that is where the Titans do a lot of their best work. So that's going to be really interesting to see how the Warriors defend that left edge, especially considering the Titans' right edge on the other side of the field, where you've got Tanner Boyd, Joe Stimpson, I think Aaron Schupp is starting at center, and you've also got Philip Sami probably on that right wing, as I go completely dark there. They are the leading missed tacklers, and that's where the Titans concede a lot of points. So we've talked about Rocco Berry shining in his matchups on the right edge. Well, this week I wrote about Adam Pompey, and given that I wrote about Rocco Berry before he had a breakout performance against, might have been the Sharks and Talakai and that Sharks edge. Well, this week I wrote about Pompey, and he's got the favorable matchup against the Titans, and that's going to be quite interesting to see how that plays out. But ultimately for the Titans, their whole team loves the missed tackle. So the edges lead their missed tackles. I think Tanner Boyd and Joe Stimpson are their worst tacklers, defending on that right edge against Jackson Ford, Luke Metcalf, and Adam Pompey. But behind them, you've got Kieran Foran and Brian Kelly. So they're on the other edge. So the Warriors have no shortage of areas to target, especially when Sam Verrills also loves a missed tackle. He's one of the most, he's quite high up there. He's got 3.2 missed tackles. So I'll list it here. Joe Stimpson, he's first worst, 4 missed tackles per game. Tanner Boyd, 3.16 missed tackles per game. Then you got Sam Verrills, starting hooker, 3.2 missed tackles. Brian Kelly, 3.1. Kieran Foran, 2.75. What does that tell you about how the Warriors can attack the Titans? You can throw all your shape at either edge, and you can send a lot of big bodies at Sam Verrills, especially when I don't think old bro, the Uso Tino Fa'aso Mala'awi, he's not playing. So the Warriors, like the whole profile of how the Warriors attack is passing through the middle, bit of footwork, bit of power, and then send the shapes out to the edges where you've got Maratene Okori and Jackson Ford running really hard lines, and you've got options either side of the field. This seems like a game the Warriors should win, and it seems like a game in which the Warriors should be able to showcase all of their best clinical attack. And I'm fascinated to see how that plays out, because the Warriors, as we know, and throughout their history, there is that lingering trauma of the Warriors not quite getting it done in these encounters previously, especially when they're chasing the best case scenario of usually trying to crack the top 8 and make finals footy. But in this instance, the Warriors can finish top 4 and get a home semi, like play home games in the finals. And this is a big deal. Like a lot of people have talked about this. A lot of folks in Australia are talking about this. Guess what? home advantage matters in the NRL. And why did the Warriors suck before? Well, they didn't have home advantage. So suddenly, when a home finals game is possible, everyone starts thinking about home advantage. But when the Warriors sucked over the last few years, no one actually pondered how important home advantage would be, which I find quite interesting, as I have done throughout the complaints about the Warriors in recent years. So the Warriors, there's ample opportunity for the Warriors to pick apart the Titans. Let's just say that. They can go to the edges, throw their shape at the edges. They can also go straight to the middle. They'll probably put a target on Sam Verrills. And when I was thinking about attacking Sam Verrills, I did come up with this vision or this idea, because Adam Whenua-Blake and Tohu Harris, they can go to the defensive line, like right at the defensive line, and they can either put on footwork or they can pass. That seems really useful, because a lot of teams, like, the dude's just going to run straight, or he's going to run at a hole. A lot of NRL forwards, they have no footwork. They're just running into bodies. And if they do have footwork, they don't pass. Well, the Warriors have Whenua-Blake and Tohu Harris, who can, like, take the ball all the way to the defensive line and then have an option of footwork or pass. That seems really difficult to stop. And I love that, let alone what all the other forwards can do as well. But taking that deeper, the Titans are also 16th for post-contact meters. And I don't think they're very high up on the decoy. I'm not going to go into any great depth about decoy runners or support play stats. I find them a bit hard to assess. But the decoy one I do find interesting, given what I said about the Titans and their post-contact meters and where the Warriors are at in this. The Warriors are 4th for decoy runs. The Titans are 13th. And the Warriors are also the Warriors are not far ahead of the Titans in post-contact meters, but they are ahead of them. They are 11th, Titans are 16th. So that also tells you about the Warriors' shape. The Warriors build out their shape. They got decoy runners, they got passes, they've got footwork, they've got everything. But most importantly, the Titans are 16th for post-contact meters. And you look at the squad that's named for this encounter. Jazz Tavanga comes back onto the extended bench. I'm not fussed if he plays or not. Like, I think the Warriors can win this game with or without Jazz Tavanga, and whatever coach Andrew Webster chooses will be all good. But just the presence of Jazz Tavanga sparked this idea in my head where the Warriors can genuinely beat up the Titans. They can smash them. They can be brutal in defense and attack. And I think that's an interesting idea, because I don't know if the Warriors can do that against the Panthers, the Broncos, those sort of teams. But they can win against those teams in different ways. But this is a game where I think the Warriors can genuinely beat up the Titans and really hammer home their aggression, their physicality, their brutality, which that coincides with targeting Sam Verrills maybe and attacking through the middle, because for all the shape, for all the attacking structures we've talked about this season, for all the razzle-dazzle, the footwork, the offloads, the tries scored in the corner, none of that is possible without smashing blokes in the middle. And if I think the Warriors can brutalize the Titans, I then think they should be able to execute their shapes and attacking flair, because it all starts with physicality and aggression through the middle. I mean, like, even if Jazz Tavanga doesn't play, Mitchell Barnett's your starting prop, and he loves to hurt other rugby league players. And I'll drop one more thing here before I throw it to you. There's no shortage of these type of players for the Warriors in their system. So I'm classifying these blokes as either blokes who are going to run really hard and brutalize you with their running, or they just have aggressive style of footy where they're just going to rip into you, gritty, hard-working, well, not gritty and hard-working, but just powerful, aggressive forwards. You got Fanua Blake, you got Mitchell Barnett, Bunty Afoa's in this mix just because he runs really hard at people. That's what you want. Jazz Tavanga's in this mix. Maratini Okore's in this mix because he's a massive body who also runs really hard. Tom Ale is in this mix because he's powerful, because he's a nugget. We don't think we've seen peak physicality from Tom Ale yet, but he's the style of player. And this is the interesting thing, because I've talked a lot about the Warriors juniors over the past week or so, and the year, and the last 5 years. Demetric Sifakula is physical. He's aggressive. He's niggly. What did I tell you about Zion Mai'uu in the subscriber podcast?
I can't remember, but I'm guessing he's big and physical and aggressive.
The moment Zion Mai'uu plays for the Warriors in the NRL, he's a cult hero. Straight away.
Instant cult hero, that was it.
Because he is brutal, he is physical, and he is aggressive. I think Isaiah Wagner has that as well. He's just a big prop, and what do big props do? They run over people. That's what your job is. So the Warriors the Warriors might have 5 of those players in the NRL team this week. So that plays into the idea of brutalizing the Titans, because you've got Fanua Blake, Barnett, Afoa, Niokore, maybe Tavanga. Well, there's 4 types of those players. Well, there's 4 of those type of players below the NRL right now coming into the equation as well. So that's what I'm eager to see against the Titans, especially considering there's more of these type of forwards coming through. And basically all the Warriors juniors that you're seeing come into NRL and New South Wales Cup, they're aggressive and they're powerful. And we've already seen Demetric Sifakula basically punch Nathan Cleary in his second or third NRL game, right? And I'm talking about Zion Mai'uu as a instant cult hero. That's a guarantee. The moment anyone sees Zion Mai'uu run the footy in NRL, people are going to love him. And that is the style of forward that is coming through the Warriors system. And I think this matchup against the Titans, for the Warriors to win, they're going to have to double down on that aggression and that brutality to really snuff out the challenge of an underdog Titans team.
Yeah, when I think about the progress of this Warriors season and the way it's just sort of unfolded, step on top of step on top of step, where they've just sort of solidified their case a little bit more as the season goes on. It really feels like they've, at first it was I'm just thinking the milestones they've ticked over along the way, winning their first game. I think it was, I've got the thing here, Rowie, against the Knights in Wellington, winning their first game, big milestone. It's an important way to start. New coach, few new players, that's a good way to start building towards where they are now. Is there was a win away to the Cowboys, I think, is another big moment of belief. There was the comeback win against the Sharks where Johnson kicked the field goal. I think that the first win against the Raiders, where they've for the first time they really started rolling on the points a little bit, was an important one. Then they had a couple games where they just absolutely thrashed teams. The Dragons was one of them. I think it was Parramatta was another one. There might have been the Dolphins in there somewhere as well. The Dolphins was before the Raiders game, but still. Sharks, of course, recently. And then, as we've seen them sort of spotlight a few different aspects of their game. I think when they started rolling on the points in that little run that they had where they were scoring 30 plus every week for about a month, you started to see that backline shape and stuff like this, and different players getting in spotlight. I don't know that they've, you obviously remember this better than me, but I can't really recall a game in which they did the brutalization thing against the team. And yet, as you say, they've got all the players to do that. Who better do you want in that case if you're going to brutalize a team than Maratini Okore'a and Fanua Blake and guys like that, Mitch Barnett and whatever? They have this. This is a card they have up their sleeve. I don't know if they've necessarily won a game specifically that way. They've won games in the grind, which is a similar thing, but it's not quite the same. It's not brutalizing. It's just holding your ground in a way. It's a little bit of a different version of the same thing. Um, it would be nice if they did that against the Titans because, as you say, like there's an opportunity to do it. There's not just an opportunity though. There's also like it's one more thing to announce to the rest of the NRL to say, oh yeah, we can do this too. Like it's not just those other ways we've been winning games. Like we can do this as well. We can just destroy you physically. And yeah, maybe they can't do that against the Broncos or Panthers necessarily, but like Broncos or Panthers aren't doing it against each other either. Like there's you cancel each other out at that point. So if you can do that against a team like, for example, the Titans sitting outside the top 8 and probably not going to make it that far. There you go. It's also just at this stage of the season, there's 5 games to go, and where are we here? The Warriors are away to the Titans, away to the Tigers, home to Manly, home to the Dragons, and away to where are we? The Dolphins. Who's beating them out of those 5? Like none of those teams are any good. Like who's gonna? The Warriors have to slip up to lose one of those games. Those teams aren't just going to go through the motions and get a victory. The Warriors have to also be off their game, and those teams have to play well. I don't necessarily see that happening. In which case, where are we? Warriors 30 points from 19 games. Well, they could get to 40 points. Like they could realistically just win out from here. You get to 40 points, suddenly, I mean, Brisbane are on 20, so they can't get higher than 42, 20 games played, that is. Penrith have an extra game in hand, haven't had their last bye, same as the Warriors. They could get to 44. Penrith, I think, play Melbourne this week, don't they? So that's a particular. The rest of Penrith's roar isn't too crazy. They've got Manly, Titans, Eels, and then Cowboys. I mean, Eels and Cowboys will give them some trouble, but those are home games. But Brisbane have Cowboys, Eels, Raiders, Storm. I mean, we're talking about the Warriors at the start of the season. Can they make the top 8? I think the way the season is shaped up, I think they can make top 2 from here. Like, it's not just it's first of all it's top 8, then it's top 4. I mean, the draw kind of favors them to give it a nudge towards potentially top. And if you aim for top 2 and don't get it, boo-hoo, you finish 3rd or 4th. That's still the best finish the Warriors have had in like at least a decade. You know, that's still a pretty outstanding season. If that's your consolation prize is a home semifinal, still no dramas. Like they're in a pretty golden position to really like sort of stomp home from where they are right now, and yeah, brutalize the Titans, and that's where it starts.
If like the Warriors need to win those games, obviously, to get the top 4, but then that reflects you as a top 4 team. Like, can you win the games you need to win? The games you should win. And because you can look at the draw and say these are easier games, but we've also seen in over 25 years, the Warriors, it's never that easy to win those games. And
football Ferns versus Philippines.
Yeah, and then again, we have seen a very different team and a different mentality and a different style of footy that should help them win these type of games, and especially when there are such clear trends in teams like the Titans and these other weaker teams where there's like clear areas to attack. And what I've realized or what I've learned about the coaching staff and how the Warriors operate this season, they will attack those areas. They will be very specific in targeting those weaknesses, and they will be brutal in brutalizing those weaknesses, which is exactly what we want to see. Just a couple other quick notes about the NRL this weekend. Parramatta Eels do have Dylan Brown back in the halves. We've also got Whittamu Greg. So the 2 Northlanders are back for the Parramatta Eels. Parramatta Eels have been slumping, which it reflects pretty well on Dylan Brown and Whittamu Greg. They are very good rugby league players. And unfortunately, Dylan Brown got himself in a situation, basically let himself down and let his team down. So how he responds, let alone like what have I always said about the Eels, their best footy involves Makahisi Makatoa. However, Brad Arthur always, throws them aside, which I find so strange. but he's on the bench as well. And if the Eels have those, basically the more Kiwi NRL players the Eels have, the better they are. I'm saying that. So if Makisi Makatoa from New Plymouth, he's on the bench, William McGreg's on the bench, and you got Dylan Brown in there, Bailey Simonson's in the centres as well. The Eels should be beating your Dragons this weekend.
Yeah.
That's I reckon that should happen. The Storm versus Panthers, that's another interesting game, as you said about the Panthers, because I love Moses Leota and Fisher Harris. Never going to stop talking about those two. Scott Sorensen's on the edge as well. Storm have Asafa Solomona coming back. They've got their full Kiwi NRL crew, William Warbrick, Jerome Hughes, Asafa Solomona, and Alec McDonald still gets instant selection in the middle for the Storm, despite being a smaller, gritty forward. And that's always been a massive note of reinforcement about his talent and what he offers, is if you're a consistent player in a team like the Melbourne Storm, because Craig Bellamy's only selecting you because you try harder than other blokes pretty much, and that's a great sign. Don't sleep on Alec McDonald. I've talked a lot about him this season. He's originally from Auckland. He's not a Xavier Willison, right? Like, Willison and Dean Mariner are not playing for the Broncos this weekend against the Cowboys. They might be late inclusions. That means I'm less interested in the Broncos because they're not playing. Alec McDonald and Xavier Willison play very similar roles as bench middles, primarily. Xavier Willison is an X-factor, huge mobile forward, and there's no shortage of them from Aotearoa, let me say that. Alec McDonald is smaller and tries really hard, but he's playing more than Xavier Willison. Shows you what is important in the NRL and what's important to the Storm. Like, it's not a negative note about Xavier Willison, because that Broncos forward pack and that Broncos squad is stacked full of depth, but it does show you there are multiple ways of like getting consistent opportunities in the NRL. As far as NRLW goes, amazing matchup tonight, Roosters versus Dragons. That is the Thursday night game. Dragons have all their players from Aotearoa: Cortez Tapo, Tyler Nathan Wong, Racing McGregor, Roxy Murdoch, and Alexis Tawaniai. Roosters, they've got Tuila Fotumawala returning. She did play last week off the bench, and now she is starting prop, so that's pretty cool. And everything else is fairly stock standard. My favorite note in previewing this weekend's NRLW footy is that Georgia Hale, she is usually leading the amount of tackles in the NRLW. Like, she does that every season. She has made 99 tackles and 1 miss. So she has 99 tackles at 99% efficiency. And the Titans, they might have 2 wins. Let me just double check that. They might have 2 wins with the Tigers. Yes, the Titans have 2 wins. And Georgia Hale plays big minutes. She's a fantastic passer. She doesn't miss a tackle. That's exactly what you want in a good team. Tigers are another team with 2 wins. They've got Leanne Tufunga playing at centre. And as I keep saying, big season for Otara. You've got Leanne Tufunga starting centre for the Tigers. She's really good. And Anessa Biddle, first season of NRL footy. She is already second for post-contact meters. She's also from Otara. Some more stats. Alexis Tawaniai, Dragons lock forward. She is 8th for total tackles in her first season. Malahafunga, her first season of NRLW. She is 6th for total tackle busts. And you've got a bunch of players on 2 try assists so far, RP Nichols and both of the Dragons halves as well. So I'm loving this season of NRLW footy, mainly because of the quality of new players. Like, Alexis Tawaniai is 18 years old and she's playing big minutes in the middle for the Dragons. Anessa Biddle might be the best winger in the competition right now. I certainly think Racing McGregor's the best halfback in the world. You've also got the likes of the rugby players that came across. Shael Robbins-Retty's fantastic in the centres for the Raiders. Tyler Nathan Wong's really impressive for the Dragons. Niall Williams-Guthrie is in that Titans team with 2 wins as well. So lots to enjoy in the NRLW this weekend and all season long. Have you watched the Dragons play NRLW?
Not fully. I've watched bits and pieces. I haven't watched much of anything that isn't Women's World Cup for the last 2 weeks. Outside of, I did watch Marko Stamenic's debut for Red Star Belgrade, which was brilliant. That was a great game.
Why was
from
it
him
so
specifically, but because he played really well, basically, and it's like gone straight into a Champions League level team, and he just immediately seems to have a really big role for them. Like, it's not just that he's signed with a new club, and you're seeing this like Sarpreet Singh only played about 13 minutes off the bench on his debut and for Hunter Rostock. Callum McCowart had similar in his debut for Silkeborg, and then he played half a game off the bench in their second match. Like, that's just the normal way of doing things, right? As you sign for a new team, you don't go straight in there unless you're a big money kind of signing. If you're just the Kiwi bloke who signed from a league below or the similar league, but in Singh's case, like, he was already playing in that league, but he was at a different team, but he's trying to set himself. Like, it's just, you don't need, like, you got to earn your minutes, basically. Like, it doesn't come naturally, it doesn't come immediately. Unless you're Marko Stamenic, who joined a club that is qualified for the Champions League group stage, that won their league season undefeated last year. They didn't lose a single game. And he just walked straight in as the starting central defensive midfielder. In this case, during preseason, he also played some as more of a further forward midfielder, but I think they signed another guy in the midfield and then sort of switched it up to where their other CDM was playing off the bench, and Stamenic is now playing as the 6. But he can do either, and the coach seems to love him. And the crazy thing about the coach loving him is that's not even the coach who signed him. Like, he signed a pre-contract in January saying, basically, when my contract expires in 6 months, I will join your club. That was announced and everything. Red Star had a different manager then. That manager then left. They brought in another guy, an Israeli fella who never, ever, ever smiles, but does seem to be quite tactically astute, because they're they cruise through their preseason and their first game of the thing. Their first game was, like I said, they went undefeated last season. So you expect them to be winning. You especially expect them to win 5-0, for example, when a team that they're playing has a red card in the first half. Like this. They don't need any legs up. So if you fellas getting sent off in the first half, they're going to cruise towards victory, which is exactly what they did. So that's one reason why their coach seems very astute. The other reason is that he just loves Marko Stamenic. So we got to respect it. We love Marko Stamenic. We've seen it for the All Whites. We've seen it for New Zealand age groups. We've seen it in bits and pieces for Copenhagen while he was there, including against Manchester City in the Champions League. That's a nice little indicator of a fella being pretty decent. And he's just gone straight into what appears to be a key player role for Red Star Belgrade, aka Crvena Zvezda, if you want to give it the Serbian name. I don't know anything about the pronunciations, but I can spell it now, so that's important. I have to write it more than I have to say it. And yeah, what else do you want from a dude like Marko Stamenic? Like, it's the preseason, the transfer, everything seems to pretty much have gone best case scenario. And this dude is going to be a special player for the All Whites. And as a New Zealand footballer, he already is. Like, he already broke the 15-year drought of appearing in the Champions League as an All White. That's not going to stop now that he's going to be playing bigger Champions League minutes this season, by the looks of it. This is a pretty astounding step up that the dude's making, because it's gone to Serbia. It's not the English Premier League. It's not Spanish Liga or things like this. It's not necessarily the ones where people are paying the most attention to. Even Libby Kakache in Serie A is probably, it's a more high profile league, even though he's at a club that's not as good. And it would be easy to let that move like Samanic's and what he's achieved already so far at Red Star sort of fly under the radar. But I am not going to let that happen, because this is massively significant, what he's done so far, and what it then sort of forecasts him to do in the future. Because, as I say, there's a Champions League group stage coming up for this team in like 2 months. Everything is forecast for this to be a pretty big season for Marco Stamanic.
We do have goal scoring clips for Ollie White and Dalton Wilkins in the Flying Kiwis beat, so you can check those out, and you can read about them in the Flying Kiwis yarn this week. But you also wrote about the Wellington Phoenix Men's Academy and some of the young players there. So basically right now we've got a deep dive into the Wellington Phoenix Development Academy system and the New Zealand Warriors Academy Development kind of pipeline system for you to read on our website, thenews-case.com. The Wellington Phoenix also signed a suspended player who has a name, and he won't be suspended soon because that's how they work. You serve the punishment and it's all good. Finn Conchi. And I remember Finn Conchi because we talked a lot about him at the under 20, might have been.
Under 20 World Cup.
Yeah, and he was, I remember us talking about him. So that basically means he was one of the better players in that New Zealand under 20s team. And the Wellington Phoenix have signed him to, is he going to be into their top squad this season? And so that continues the theme of the Wellington Phoenix re-upping with local players, which we love to see, as well as the basically Warriors and Phoenix are thriving with their local talent right now as the New Zealand Breakers continue to shun local talent from Aotearoa. Because there was that defender, the tall defender, right?
Lucas Kelly-Hield.
Yes, he was signed a few weeks ago. Now they've signed Finn Conchi. They're obviously signing overseas players as well, but this seems to fit into your observations and your insights about how the Wellington Phoenix are building out their squad with local talent.
Yeah, because last year was a little bit of a down year for academy minutes, and some of that was, I think, Ufuk Talay just wanting to go win sort of thing. But others of it was like, just incidental things. They sold Ben Waine, so there goes a lot of minutes that would have gone to an academy player. Ben Old was potentially poised for a little bit of a breakthrough season, spent the last half of it mostly out injured. Sam Sutton had some competition at times from Lucas Moregas. He also had like multiple injuries throughout the thing, which allowed Moregas just to play a lot more than him. Moregas was only on loan, so he's gone back to Newcastle now. Presumably, Sutton, Old, they're going to get bigger minutes. With Ben Waine gone, you think Oscar Van Hattem is in a position to potentially go from getting the occasional sort of 5-10 minute cameo that he's been getting, which is a big step up for him to start getting consistent little spots like that off the bench last season. But the next step is to turn that into like 20-30 minute cameos in the occasional start. And importantly, as I think also applies to Ben Old, goal contributions. Like it is score some goals, set some up, those kind of things. That's how you demand further thing. Ultimately, a game is decided on who scores the most goals, right? You can look good, but you still got to contribute those kind of contribute those elements if you want to keep playing bigger minutes, if you want to make those next step, which is what Ben Waine did. If you look at Ben Waine, and even Kellen Elliott last season, who's also left, but he was popping up with assists too. Sam Sutton throughout his career has been pretty decent at getting in, like swinging that ball in the penalty area, setting up a couple goals. Expect if he's got a resurgence season coming up, you can see more from him there. Let alone Alex Paulson is going to be competing for starting goalkeeping duties now that Ollie Sale is gone. And Finn Sermon seems to have stepped up the ranks. He's probably not a starting centre back for them, but it looks like he'll probably be their next man up kind of CB, which is 1 or 2 steps above where he was last season. So that's a potential resurgent aspect as well. Like it's an absolute theme of it's a theme of the off season. When I started writing that piece about 2 or 3 weeks ago, it was still a theme last week when I actually finished writing it. And then since then they've signed Finn Conchi. So it's even more of a theme now,
What do you expect from Finn Conchi coming into this season?
Well, it's an interesting one that they said from the start they would be targeting, and like they wanted to boost up one of their academy midfielders. And I think that was always likely to be Conchi, but you don't come out and say that ahead of time. But then his performances at the under 20 World Cup pretty much nailed that on, where he not only was a really good, just like distributing midfielder, he also set up all three of their goals at that tournament. Like there was, I think one of them was a deep cross, one was a ball over the top. Like it's variety of how he did this as well. And we're not going to see him for a little while because he's serving that 10-game suspension. He said something, apparently used a homophobic word or something in a Central League game, which like I said this at the time when I wrote about it. It's like he's 19 years old. He's done something dumb. He's going to learn from it, let alone the fact that he's been like, embarrassed in public about it. When he signs his first professional deal, he has to answer questions about it, which is another, it's something else taking the shine off that day. But, the suspension is there for a reason. You serve the suspension, that's the punishment. You don't need to be punished because he's suspended. The suspension is the punishment. All for giving a teenager a second chance, and I think he's easily the best player available for that spot. He's earned that role, and he's coming in at a time when Clayton Lewis has just left, Steven Ugarkovic has just left, Nick Pennington's been elevated. They've signed Mohamed El Tai as an Australian fellow coming in to be their sort of defensive midfielder. Alex Roof is still there, but Italiano's been talking all along about how his team is going to play very differently to how Talai's team played, and not necessarily in terms of like he uses some of those coaching buzzwords, about like structure and intent and beginning points and stuff. And so, but he hasn't sort of tipped his hand yet. We'll potentially find out on Friday because they're playing their Aussie Cup game, their first one against Peninsula Power or something like that. It's one of them Aussie NPL sides. Potentially get a sign there, but I suspect we're going to see a 3-man midfield, which would mean that it lends reason to why you would be wanting to bolster up your midfielder by adding an extra academy player into it. It also means that Conchi isn't just there to make up numbers, because you're going to need more midfielders than you had last year, and you've lost your 2 starters from last year. So there's a big role on the line here, and we won't see him. They're not going to pick him for the Aussie Cup games while he's suspended for Central League, which I don't think is I think they probably could with different confederations, let alone different competitions. But I think that makes sense. Like, you don't undermine the Central League suspension. You just let that play out. And then at the moment, he's just a training player. Fair enough. But come the A-League season, there's a potential he could have a relatively decent role. And he's not like a 17-year-old, 16, 17-year-old pushing up. He's 19, turning 20 soonish. Like, he's ready for senior football. Physically, he's ready for senior football. Technically, he's ready for senior football. And the coach has clearly shown that he is going to pick young players. He's got enough of them in his squad. He doesn't have a choice. He's not going to be able to make a team without them. So there's a big role there on the line for Conchi, who I genuinely think is capable of being a bit of a breakout player this season.
Let's wrap it up there. Big up yourself. Enjoy all the Aotearoa sport. Tune into the website. Enjoy the newsletter coming out Friday. And we'll be back next week with more Aotearoa Sporting podcast. Big up, big up. Kia kaha. Stay beautiful. Chur, chur.